history program, interviewing Gene A. Ranstead at the Honeywell plant on Bond Street, November 29, 1972. Gene, the first thing that I'm going to ask you is date of birth, place of birth, father's name, full name, and your mother's maiden name. Just stick right there. We can get it.
Okay, I was born at Breman, Indiana, September the 10th, 1922. And my father was Forrest J. Ranstead. Mother's name was Gladys.
Her maiden name?
Gladys E. Martin.
Ranstead.
Right.
Where did you go to school?
Most of my schooling took place at Silver Lake, Indiana. I had previously went to Breman, Indiana for several years, I think, till 7th grade. And we moved to Silver Lake and finished. I graduated there. Following that, I went to work at Honeywell and had gone to school at Purdue practically every winter since.
Now you graduated high school then, I'd say 1940, 41?
About 39.
39, and then you went immediately to work for Honeywell.
Right.
And how did you happen to get a job with Honeywell?
Well, we had the work done on the farm, and they were needing help, so I came in to help out that winter.
What year was that?
In the fall of 1940, and I've been helping ever since.
Who hired you, and what were the circumstances surrounding it?
Well, D.L. Leland was the personnel manager at that time, and it happened that he was some of my relation. That's how I found out they needed help. See?
Yeah. Good.
And at that time, we were pretty much a model shop, just building industrial motors and pyrometers and a few gas valves.
You did really then, when you started, you really didn't intend to work just in the wintertime after the work was done on the farm?
That's all, yes. Planned to go back to the farm following that.
Yeah. How much were you paid when you started?
40 cents an hour.
40 cents an hour.
Yes.
And what was your first job?
The first job was working in the shop running a drill press.
And who was your supervisor?
Alonzo Mullendor was my immediate foreman at that time.
Yeah. And what were the hours and so forth? And
we only had a day shift during those days. The shop was rather small.
Yeah.
And at that time we still had the foundry. What is now Vice Brothers Foundry was part of the downtown plant back in 1940.
Yeah. Tell me how your career progressed and so forth as you worked for Honeywell.
Well, I wasn't married at that time, and so I had a lot of spare time, and I'd come down to the shop after hours and learn how to grind drills and sharpen tools and what have you. And I also took a shop at the local high school, vocational school, on machine shop practices, and of course in shop mathematics was the first ones. And of course that gave me some more background to apply toward my job. Then the war came along, we got into war work, and we got into a second shift, and so I spent all my spare time going down there in the evenings learning how to run screw machines and automatic screw machines and turret lathes and mills and what have you on my own time. Well, then when we expanded, I was knowledgeable about all these different pieces of equipment, and so I was made a supervisor in the shop and went to work nights for supposedly 3 weeks at that time, and it wound up I worked nights for 7 years.
These were during the war years?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I was in charge of the second shift machine shop at that time then we called it the old slumber building at that time. It was where Whip Slumber used to have his used car.
That was across the street from their main facility
right.
on Canal Street. Yeah.
We had a machine shop over there that we did war work, making scopes, periscopes and telescopes and M51 sights and such as that, and I had charge of the second shift there.
Now these machine tools were all handmade. There were no mass-produced items at that time on these periscopes and so forth.
To start out with, we tooled everything from scratch, and we fit parts together and so on. But then later on we had permanent gauges and permanent tooling, and we got into mass production on them.
Did you have a government inspector here at that time?
Oh, yes, yes.
Were they-
Especially in the optical section where we put them together. See, the machining of the parts was not so terribly critical, but they had to fit, of course.
Do you remember any particular problems you had during those years with that you had to solve by yourselves? New problems, say? Or?
Well, we had many mechanical problems because we designed all of our own tools here too. In fact, we hired a tool designer, and he helped us tremendously. But we made like hand forged and ground our forming tools, and made a lot of chasers and things of that nature too. Chasers for die heads, we'd cut our own. We'd make the tooling to produce the thread, you see. But the periscope bodies in particular, they had contours in them because of the different changes they wanted inside and so on. And we forged all those tools and made them from scratch.
Was the domestic production suspended then during those years?
Very much so. It was quite limited, quite limited. Some of the other plants picked up some of the lines, but we still carried on a few of the items here. We were mostly government work at that time.
How many days a week were you working?
7 days a week and 7 nights a week.
How many hours a day?
How many hours? 8 hours.
8-hour shifts. Were there any women in the shop at that time? Or?
Yes, there were some women.
And what kind of money were you making then during the war?
Well, our wages come up quite a bit at that time.
Yeah.
Of course, I'd gotten into supervision too, so I made quite a bit more money too.
Do you remember anything particular during those war years? Any problems or outstanding problems that you had? That,
Oh, at one time we were given an order from the government to build some scopes for some tanks. And these tanks were to be put on a boat, I think at New Orleans at a certain day and date. And we had an officer in the service who was at our command to get any piece of equipment we wanted from any place in the United States or wherever it was needed to tool up and make these scopes and get them down there on that boat to put on those tanks at a certain day and date. And for that venture, we received the Army and Navy E Award.
obviously, you made the deadline.
We made it, yes.
Yeah, good. Then what happened? The war ended, and was it a smooth transition back into domestic production, or?
No, but we did get back into making registers and other things after the war, and picked up some of the old product lines that had been sort of laid aside.
Were you still on nights then?
No, I got back on the day shift then.
Tell me what the domestic production that you got back into.
One of our big products at that time was the registers for heating of homes and offices. We made hot and cold air return grills and things of that nature. Bought a battery of punch presses and air presses and so on to tool this particular job.
Were you still in supervision then, James?
Yes.
Yeah, you stayed in supervision from then on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I worked in the tool room as a tool grinder and a tool maker for a while, and following that then I went back into the machine shop as assistant foreman under Molly was still foreman at that time.
I'm going to do him, incidentally.
You are, yeah, he's a good man.
Well, we'll go back to our domestic production after World War II, and we're back into heat return registers and so forth, and you're in the tool room.
Mm-hmm. Well, after I worked in the tool room for a while for Bussy Martin, I went back into production, working under Alonzo Maldor as the assistant foreman. And we had tooled up on a hydraulic, electric operated damper motor. We tooled it primarily for Sears and Roebuck as a competitive item for them. And also we picked up a line of gas valves from Minneapolis. We built the motors and the valves and did all the assembly work on both those. And they were tooled from scratch by us and built up here in our plant. We even made the laminations for the motor stackings and the windings. The motors were wound here complete. And along with that, we picked up some diaphragm valves and also some butterfly valves from Minneapolis, and some controls for farm use that we had put into production. So our personnel group was built up again like it was during the war years. Well, never got back up to 1,200, but we did have a lot of people back on domestic production. Yeah. And then following that, we got into what was known as part of the ASROC program, and this is a missile that was made for the Navy. It was launched from a ship to the air, and then it went into the sea and down and would seek out, hunt, and move in and destroy a submarine. And we built the motor and the rocket section for that ASROC missile, as well as the aluminum container to store this bird while it was carried on the destroyer. We built that container.
This was all still being done down at the Canal Street plant?
Well, at that time, we had this plant now. We had part of this plant out here, and we'd also taken over the old Ford meter box. Well, it used to be the Ford meter box. We had moved in there. And we were building periscopes primarily in the Ford meter box. We built periscopes for tanks mostly. And then when they started to move into the islands, and the CBs would go in and prepare advanced sites for planes to come in and land, well, the snipers were picking off the bulldozer operators. They couldn't get anything done because they'd shoot them out of the seats. So they finally enclosed the cabs with steel, armor plate steel, and we built a scope then where the operator could look in and out, and he could also tilt his eyes up and he would look down and see the blade. It was a double set of mirrors inside that scope. We built the first ones of those. We built quite a few, just primarily for protection of the CB personnel while they were going in there.
Were security regulations pretty strict during World War II at the plant?
We had guards on duty all the time, yes.
All the time?
All the time.
I talked to someone here recently, and he disputed with the guards all the time. He thought that they were relatively loose on their security at that time.
Well, during the time that we made periscopes, now following that, when we were into the this anti-submarine rocket missile, ASROC and so on, we did not have guards in. But when we were working 7 days a week on those scopes and so on, we had guards around the plant. You had to have a badge and show your picture and all that.
Since you were in supervision, do you remember any particular labor problems that you were having at that time at all?
Well, I used to have an independent union when I started to work here. And then later, some of the newer employees decided that they didn't want to be associated with an independent union. They'd rather have a national union. And so finally they held an election, and the national recognized union went out by a handful of people.
I've gone over this international, local union versus international union story with many of the employees. Some that were on the company union and so forth. Specifically, can you remember any internal friction on the labor force? Well, let's say back in the 40s when you were trying to grind out war protection and everything like that.
Well, of course, many of these people had worked here for years and years, and they were very, shall I say, company-oriented as far as their feelings, and they didn't want an outside union. And naturally, they voted against it, and there was strong friction immediately following that about the people, because they had to belong to the recognized union at that time.
Well, this really didn't come to a head till what, 1956 or
Something like that. Yeah.
When they moved out here, I think, is when they finally got into.
Well, we had trouble down to the plant too.
Yeah. But I still don't think we've decided whether, as your job as a supervisor, that you were having internal problems with the labor force or not.
Well, I had problems, yes, so did everybody. Because the union would drum up little things to cause grievances, and you'd have to listen to them. That's part of the law, you know.
Yeah.
And we took 3 cases all the way to arbitration.
Now, this was with the company union.
No.
This was after you went to the
That was-
international.
Right.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble as long as you had the company union?
No
trouble. Grievances were settled and no problems. Well, that's the impression that I get from the older employees, that everything went well and they were all going along at a good rate, and well, I rocked the boat.
That's exactly about what happened.
Yeah. I know that, did Carl Schwab ever work for you?
No, but I knew Carl for years. He was working here when I worked here for many, many years.
Yeah, well, of course, I did, Carl, and we talked about the union, and when they had the company union, of course, they permitted him to stay on until he was something like 73 or 75 years old, long after a union, an international union, would permit a worker to stay on.
Yes.
Well, that's rather interesting, your observation. Did you belong to the union yourself when you were just a factory?
Yes. I still have my card.
Labor, you still have? Well,
Yeah.
That's good.
But it was the company union, of course, at
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah. You never served on any committees, though?
No.
Well, that's rather interesting. Was there a lot of friction, did you feel, was there a lot of friction when they moved from the old plant out to this more modern facility?
Because of the move?
Yes.
No. No, I don't remember necessarily because of the move.
But everything, to your impression, went smoothly?
But see, we retained the Ford plant even after the old plant was tore down. We had the Ford plant for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And we were still building periscopes for the Army to use in their tanks. And then we lost our periscope contract. And following that time, then those people were moved out here, and we no longer had any plants except the one in existence here now.
Who was the plant manager back in the 40s when you were, say, starting out? Was Mr. Shivers the...
Yes, he was. P.F. Shivers was the plant manager.
Did you have much contact with him?
Yes, I did, because he had a young son. He was about my age, and we became pretty well acquainted, and I've been to their house several times.
Then he moved on to Minneapolis, I think, in 1940.
Yes.
Moseworth, of course, was plant manager also.
Yes. See, Mose was working here in the design lab when I came to work, and Mose was going to school during that time, and later when he graduated, well, he was made plant manager. I'd known Mose before he became manager.
Of course, he'd worked here as a young man, even
That's
in
right.
summers going to school and so forth. We're going to get back to our Mr. Honeywell story and so forth, and get some of this other information that is pertinent to the story that we want. How about, this is a rather tricky question, how about when the Freeport group came in? Did you, what was your reaction? Let me ask you what your reaction was. Remember now that this is not public information, this is history that we're talking about.
Sure. Well, I think myself and everybody else was included. We were all dubious about our positions at that time because we had, shortly after their arrival, we'd seen some people who'd been here for years who were no longer with the company because of their decisions that they weren't needed, or that they wanted to bring somebody along and put in that position. There were 5 men came down here from Freeport at that time.
And Bob Ensler headed that.
That's right.
Time,
Right.
Did you, go ahead.
So everybody was pretty shaky about where they would stand, or how long they would be standing there, you might say.
Yeah. Did you worry about your job?
I suppose everybody did.
Yeah. When they started transferring people and demoting and releasing certain employees, everyone got a little scared.
Naturally, yes.
Did you feel at that time that they might close the plant?
Never had that fear, no.
Yeah.
Or that feeling, no, never did.
That seems to be the general impression also, that there was never a feeling from the employees that they would ever close it during that period of time. I'll ask you something right up to date, right along the same subject. After this last big announcement and everything else, did you think that there would be some possibilities that Honeywell may not be in the community forever?
I've never entertained that feeling.
Do you feel that anybody has?
Yes, some people have.
You really think so?
Yes, some of the employees have been curious about it, but perhaps they were in a position to not be as well informed as I have been most of the time.
That's interesting. When did you first meet Mr. Honeywell?
Well, shortly after I came to work, because he made almost daily visits to the plant in those days. And at that time, he was building the memorial building. And I did a lot of work for him, myself and about 3 or 4 other men, down at the memorial building. He used to dream up special fixtures or lights or stairways or artificial stumps or anything he'd think of what he'd want to know. He'd come down to the shop and want somebody to make a replica or make this thing, and then he'd want to look at it. Well, you always made something about 6 times. To most people, this hurt their pride. They want to make it and forget about it. But to Mr. Honeywell, for example, we made this light that looks sort of like a cornstalk turned upside down, and that goes up to the stairway, it goes up the mezzanine.
Yes.
And we built that at least 6 times. And we'd make a sample, and he'd say, that's just what I had in mind, but he said, since I've seen it, he said, make it a little thinner there, a little fatter over here, a little longer there. We built another one. And we built the light shades for the grill work above the basketball floor. We worked on those for weeks until we got a set of them that diffused the light and didn't make any shadows, and that the light experts and Mr. Honeywell approved. And the lights downstairs in the skating rink, we made those fixtures. And
these fixtures were really all handmade then?
You bet. We carved them out from scratch.
Would you make your mock-up in cardboard or wood, or make it right out of metal?
Occasionally, but we most times made one out of metal. And I built the railing and the nose pieces that go down to the skating rink, and the decorations on these rails that go down to the southwest entrance of the skating rink. There's a black metal wrought iron railing. I spent a week and a half putting the decorations on those rails. But I made the first ones out of cardboard, then metal, and then more metal and more metal, and we finally got what he wanted.
That he would really pay attention to detail.
Oh, to the nth degree. He'd look at it, and you'd leave it there for a few days, and he'd come back and look at it some more. And while they were working on the community building, he made a trip to Decatur. They put up a new gym over Decatur, and he saw that the rails, which were made of pipe, and they went around the section where the people sat. Those rails had rounding corners instead of square knobs on their corners like we had. And he felt that these square corners were a hazard if people would fall on them. Well, these rails were embedded down in the bricks about 36 inches deep, all mortared in and everything.
They had been set already?
Oh, yes, yes, for about 8 months at that time. And he said, now, I'd like to have those cut out and some nice radiuses put on these corners. And he said, when I look at it, he said, I want to see that pipe coming straight across horizontally and vertically, absolutely perpendicular, and a nice radius. And he said, where that joint is, he said, I don't want to see any joint. So I said, yes, Mr. Honeywell, and we proceeded to cut all those corners out. And we got a pipe bender, and we'd bend the pipe and then cut it to fit. We'd weld it, file it, take sandpaper and smooth it, paint it, so that you couldn't see where they were welded in there. We changed every corner in that gymnasium.
Did that satisfy him?
Oh, yes, yeah, he was pleased.
And as I noticed here recently, they're just as good today as they were the day they were put in.
I hope so.
You know, they are.
We made all of the grills that are in the openings for the air intake system for that building. We formed up the outside frames and put all louvers and hardware and everything on them. We hand built all those. So I had a lot of contact with him through those different projects.
Cost obviously was no problem.
He had to know to the penny what every project cost him. He never complained about it, but he wanted to know exactly how much money you spent and how many hours on every little project.
Did you have to submit a written record to him or verbal?
No, I kept a written record of everything. I can't recall the date, but I had 3 men help me, and we built for the country club the framework that held the awning over the terrace and the marquee out there. And he said, now when I see those extensions that support that, he said, I want to look down that row, and he said, I want to see one post. And he said, I want this A-frame section built so that when I crawl up on a step ladder and I look down across those pipes, he said, I want to see one pipe. He said, I want those built so that when they're taken down, they can throw them in the garage, and next spring they can take them out, and any piece is interchangeable with all the others. I said, yes, Mr. Honeywell. So we drew up a sketch and a plan, proceeded to build this out of 3/4-inch galvanized pipe. And all the joints on these A-frames and everything were brazed together and filed and sandpapered. Beautiful job. We spent many, many hours making those things and had to make a big fixture so that all the bushings in them fit free and they telescope together. He called the awning people down from Elkhart to measure up the awning. And he called me one evening and said, they said they'd never seen such a structure. It was immaculate. He was real proud of it. But he said, I got to thinking. He said, should the wind blow real hard when they have that awning on there? He said, maybe it'll shake that 3/4. He said, could we go to inch pipe? And you couldn't hardly buy a piece of pipe in those days. It was during the war, you know, pipe was rationed. I said, I expect we could. So we scrapped all of it and made it out of inch pipe.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
And you were still submitting these costs?
Oh, you bet.
So who else was helping you on these projects that would come in contact with these various projects at the center and so forth?
Oh, Louis Crow was one of my main helpers. And
I think we'll test this one now, and I guess we're going. We got, I think we were talking about the attributes of Mr. Honeywell when our tape ran out before. What would you say his outstanding personality traits would be?
I remember him because of his interest in the youth and also his promotion of the music and appreciation of music, because at times he afforded the means for the whole band to attend a concert or some music festival or activity. And of course we can't overlook the fact that he left the community building for the entire city and surrounding area of Wabash. So he was definitely interested in all the people, not just one group, but he and his wife are both very interested in the music aspect of the schools and the community, as well as the plays. I remember when he put that sound system in, he had the best acoustical engineers in the country at that time, because he wanted that stage and the acoustics to be the best available when he put on a musical or a play or something. So when he gave something to the community, he wanted it to be the best.
You've seen some good management and bad management over the years, Gene.
Of the Honeywell company here at Wabash, you mean? Well, naturally. But through all of it, the company has grown and prospered at Wabash as well as other places.
Never been discouraged about it at times, or even when they referred to the Freeport gang came in.
Well, some of us had been here a long time, were pretty discouraged about some of the old timers who were asked to leave because they didn't seem to fit into the program that these 5 people had set up, or that they were going to use.
When you talk to you're probably one of the youngest old employees in the plant. I'm sure you are. You have to be at your age. 50 this year, right?
That's about right.
When you talk to the older employees, like the retired employees, what impression do you get from them relative to having worked at Honeywell those years and so forth?
You mean their feelings about Honeywell?
Yeah. What impression do you get from them?
Oh, it was a very happy and pleasing experience for most all the older people who had worked here, like Bussy Martin had been tool-room foreman for years and years, and Lonnie Kroll and Roy Kroll and John Bloxam had worked for him for years, and Glenn Kester was another toolmaker who worked here for a long time. And they were all a very congenial group, and if you had a breakdown or needed tools or anything, they were good. They were professionals, and they really enjoyed their job, or they wouldn't have stayed so many years. Mm-hmm. And we had some people who worked in the shop too, Ugly Rump and Fred Ellis and Mully, Harvey Mullendore, his brother, had also been here for many years. And I'm sure too that all those men enjoyed their job. And then you get into the assembly area, there were several men and women who have worked here for years and years. You didn't go up there and hear them grumble and gripe. Pretty happy and contented group of people.
That seems to be the impression I get, that they were happy at their job and they liked their work and satisfied with their pay. And you get the impression that most of them are well pleased with the retirement and so forth?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the impression I get, that they're all happy and seem to be making it on whatever pennies they get. Mm-hmm. I think that's important. My impression is that in talking to all these different people is that Honeywell has been good for the community, and the employees have been good to Honeywell. And it's a two-way street. It always has been.
That's very definite. Yeah.
Can you think of anything else that we might talk about that'd be of interest or be of historical value? Augie Rump told me when they took the machines away, why, that was about finished him off, and he was ready to retire. He wanted to do machine work, and that was it.
We have some other men who left the machine shop because we no longer had machine like they used to run, like the turret machines and gear hubs and so on. Mm-hmm. Some sought employment at other places and have completely left the company, but some of the old-timers are still here running punch presses, and some were moved up to the tool room as some of the tool makers retired. Some of the machine operators became tool makers at a lower class and then worked up. But when you take a machine away from a man, he's almost like a man without a country, you might say.
I'm going out this afternoon, as I told you, I'm going out to see Ben Simmons. And can you remember anything interesting or unusual about Ben that I at least kid him about, if nothing else?
Well, as I first remember Ben, he was in charge of the shop where we made dampers. We made dampers for locomotives, and for oil refineries, for air conditioning, about any kind of damper in the world we made. Jim Job and I was assigned to make the first round Venturi dampers that had ever been built here at Honeywell. And they went out to a big oil refinery someplace that they were built 12 feet in diameter, built in sections and put together to make a big circle. We used to make stainless steel dampers for locomotives. The first diesels that came along all had stainless steel dampers on. We made dampers for ships, and of course all those were stainless steel because of the salt water and corrosive action. And Ben was in charge of that area for several years. We did a lot of spot welding, and we built dampers. And at that time we had some old ordered people that lived with us, and they had these long beards. And this one fellow in particular had an extremely long beard. It was down about almost to his navel, you know. Well, he wore a face shield, but when you spot weld galvanized, there are lots of sparks. And one day some of those sparks got into his beard and he caught fire. He started out the door. If it hadn't been for two people catching him, we don't know what would have happened to that man, because the harder he ran, the more it fanned that blaze, you know.
Yeah.
They finally caught him at the door and sat on him and put it out.
Yeah, obviously. That would be interesting. Well, I can't think of anything else. If you have any reflections or anything you want to leave for history, why, now's the time to speak up. You have family?
Yes, I have two daughters. They're grown and married at this time. One has 3 children, the other has 4, so we have 7 grandchildren.
Yeah. Where do they live?
They both live in Wabash County. One married a farmer and lives out by the Crow, and the other married a state trooper named Jerry Holtz, and they live in Wabash County too.
Do you ever regret leaving the farm?
No,
Do you ever wish you were back on it sometime?
not really. I still enjoy going back to the farm or going to the outdoors, like hunting and fishing and so on. That's how I get my outdoor.
Yeah. Are your parents still living?
No, both are gone.
And is the family farm gone,
Yes,
where you grew up?
yes.
It's gone.
We sold it shortly after Mother passed away.
I think it's great to live in Wabash. I think there will have a lot less problems than a lot of other places. Makes it look nice. Well, I think I'll close this interview and I'll go catch Ben Simmons. If we have nothing else to say, you might. It'll be in the paper that the interview's taking place, and you might tell the children that they can tell their children that your record will be at the library. So, in case someday they want to know what Grandpa did, why, all they have to do is look it up. I think that's a good idea. And this is George Dingledine conducting the interview.